Donald J. Trump has long been a lightning rod for controversy, stirring up debates that often transcend traditional political norms. From his rhetoric challenging the legitimacy of elections to his veiled suggestions about extending his time in office, Trump has planted seeds of anxiety across the political spectrum. His recent meeting with House Republicans reignited these fears, with subtle but unmistakable hints about serving beyond the constitutional limits of 2 terms as President of the United States. This notion, while constitutionally prohibited, has struck a nerve. The anxiety isn't without merit. After all, Trump has already attempted to defy the norms of democratic transfer of power. Whether it's his claims of election fraud, attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, or his supporters' violent storming of the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, Trump's actions have demonstrated a willingness to push boundaries most Americans once thought were unbreachable. This raises critical questions. Could Donald Trump realistically extend his hold on power? What does the U.S. Constitution say about such a scenario? And, perhaps more troublingly, does the Constitution even matter to him or his base anymore? While the answers may seem straightforward on paper, the political reality is much more complicated, especially in what increasingly feels like a post-constitutional era. Let's delve deeper into Trump's defiance of democracy and examine the real risks to the integrity of American governance. 1. The constitutional framework. Can a president serve more than 2 terms? The United States Constitution sets firm boundaries on presidential tenure. The 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951 after Franklin D. Roosevelt's unprecedented 4 terms, explicitly limits a president to 2 terms in office. It states, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president, or acted as president, for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once." In simpler terms, this means that no one can serve more than 2 elected terms, and even those who ascend to the presidency via succession, e.g., a vice president taking over, are limited to a maximum of 10 years in office. This amendment exists to prevent the consolidation of power, a hallmark of autocratic regimes. Despite these clear constitutional safeguards, Trump has repeatedly teased the idea of serving beyond his allowed terms. In one instance, he humorously floated serving for more terms while speaking to supporters, a comment many dismissed as a joke. However, his repeated references to overstaying constitutional limits, coupled with his authoritarian tendencies, have made these remarks anything but humorous to a significant portion of the population. 2. The hypothetical switcheroo strategy. Could Trump circumvent the rules? One particularly interesting and legally unviable scenario raised by a YouTube viewer posited whether Trump could sidestep the 2-term limit by running as vice president. The idea goes like this. Trump runs as a vice presidential candidate in 2028 alongside someone like Senator J.D. Vance. Once elected, the president resigns or is otherwise removed from office, allowing Trump to ascend to the presidency once again. While this might sound like a clever loophole, it is explicitly unconstitutional. According to the 12th Amendment, no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president can be elected vice president. Since Trump is ineligible to serve another term as president, he also cannot legally assume the office via succession. This effectively shuts down the switcheroo gambit. However, constitutional safeguards only matter if they are respected. Trump's past behavior has demonstrated his willingness to exploit legal gray areas and outright ignore norms if it suits his interests. This reality has raised concerns among political analysts, who argue that while Trump cannot legally pursue such a strategy, his history suggests he might still attempt it or a variation of it. 3. A post-constitutional era? Examining the erosion of democratic norms. The more significant concern here isn't just Trump's specific actions, but the broader erosion of constitutional norms under his influence. Many observers believe the United States has entered what could be called a post-constitutional era, where adherence to the rule of law is treated as optional by certain factions. For instance, Trump's presidency saw repeated attacks on the First Amendment. From branding the media as the enemy of the people to his administration's aggressive pursuit of whistleblowers, Trump's disdain for the free press became a hallmark of his tenure. Meanwhile, his Republican allies in Congress have increasingly targeted states that implement policies contrary to Trump's agenda, even when those policies are constitutionally protected under the 10th Amendment, which grants states rights not explicitly delegated to the federal government. This selective application of constitutional principles is emblematic of a larger problem: the willingness of Trump and his allies to prioritize power over principle. If Trump were to seek ways to extend his rule, it's not the Constitution that would stop him, it's whether he faces sufficient political and institutional resistance. 4. Lessons from the past, the 2020 election and beyond. Trump's actions following the 2020 presidential election offer a stark warning. After losing to Joe Biden, Trump embarked on a relentless campaign to overturn the results. He promoted baseless claims of widespread voter fraud, filed over 60 lawsuits, most of which were dismissed, and pressured state officials to find votes in his favor. The culmination of these efforts was the January 6th Capitol insurrection, where a mob of Trump's supporters stormed the seat of American democracy in a violent attempt to disrupt the certification of Biden's victory. This unprecedented event revealed the lengths to which Trump and his supporters were willing to go to cling to power, even in the face of clear constitutional prohibitions. If Trump was willing to defy democratic norms once, there's little reason to believe he wouldn't do so again. His rhetoric about serving beyond 2 terms should therefore be taken seriously, not as a joke or mere hyperbole, but as a potential warning of what he might attempt if given the opportunity. 5. The role of Republican allies and the cult of personality. A critical factor in Trump's ability to challenge democratic norms is the unwavering loyalty of his base and Republican allies in Congress. Despite his numerous legal troubles, including multiple indictments and a criminal conviction, Trump remains the frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. His support among GOP voters has remained remarkably resilient, largely due to his cultivation of a cult of personality. This dynamic poses a significant threat to constitutional governance. When political loyalty overrides respect for the rule of law, the guardrails of democracy become dangerously weakened. Trump's allies have already shown a willingness to enable his most egregious behavior, whether by defending his attempts to overturn the 2020 election or by downplaying the events of January 6th. Donald Trump's repeated hints at extending his presidency beyond constitutional limits are more than just rhetorical provocations. They're a reflection of his broader disregard for democratic norms and the rule of law. While the Constitution clearly prohibits him from serving more than 2 terms, his past actions suggest he might still attempt to subvert these limits if given the chance. The real danger lies not just in Trump's individual ambitions, but in the systemic erosion of constitutional norms that his presidency has accelerated. From undermining trust in elections to fostering a culture of political loyalty over principle, Trump has reshaped the American political landscape in ways that will likely reverberate for decades. As the 2024 election approaches, Americans must remain vigilant. Protecting democracy requires more than just adhering to constitutional provisions. It demands a collective commitment to the principles that underpin them. Without that commitment, Trump's defiance of democracy could become not just a troubling chapter in history, but a permanent feature of American politics.